We've got beer and you don't. That's not fair.
How do you know? I like that.
Hey, I'm Jeff Moss. We're going to take off our masks here because we're socially distanced and vaccinated. And I want to welcome you to our Locknote on day one. And for those of you who haven't been to one of these before, it's kind of casual. And the idea we have is we want you to feel like you're listening to us have a conversation, arguing, joking. And we're trying to get at a couple of different things that are either controversial or buzzwords or trends that they've spotted while they're doing their work on the review board, reviewing hundreds of submissions, looking for trends. But then also, toward the end, we'll open it up to questions and answers from the audience. And so it's meant to be pretty casual, and we're looking forward to it. So I'm going to start by introducing everybody. On my right is Jay Healey at Columbia. And then next to him is Stephanie Domas from Intel. I'm Jeff Moss, Kymberlee Price, consultant, and Neil Wyler, grifter from RSA. So says the bio. All right, so I want to start it off with just some general conversations. And normally what we do is we sit in a table before this, and we say, who has a good topic? And as soon as we start arguing with each other, we stop the conversation and try to keep it bottled up for when we come out here. So the first one that sort of kicked that off was based on the keynote this morning. It got to an interesting point of, okay, so who's responsible for solving keynote? Well, I know who's responsible for the keynote. Drink. Who's responsible for supply chain? It is those closest to the levers. Like if you're closest to the build environment, you are responsible. Is it the CEO? Where does the responsibility lie? And we're going to kick that off.
Yeah, I'll just jump in where I thought it was interesting that Matt said that. Like he was like, okay, his opinion was that it was up to the platform developers, which to me, like, just made me go, oh, we're screwed. Right. Like I'm like, we're totally
The only
screwed.
one that's going to save us is Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, or right? I mean, is that what he's saying? Or is it all the middleware manufacturers that produce middleware that we've never heard of that are making the technology?
That's fair, because when you're talking about like what dependencies lie all between all those different things, like how do you even begin to have that conversation about who's responsible? Like who's responsible when everybody is responsible?
Right, and that's the thing is, you mentioned, are we waiting for Apple, one of the FANG companies, Microsoft, whatever. The reality is people have been talking about this since 2014, about securing supply chain, about securing open source, and it's always been a theoretical risk. And it's really complicated and really expensive, and it really doesn't help this quarter's profits. So the problem is
too abstract.
Nobody's doing it.
Yeah.
Nobody's doing it correctly yet. And I've had a lot of rage for the last month over this, quite frankly.
Let it out. This is a safe place. We're all in a safe place.
I'm watching incident response teams around the world burn out after all of the pressure of COVID and now ransomware. And leaders are acting like it's such a shock. Oh my gosh, who could have seen this company? All of us saw it coming.
Right.
Like all of us saw it coming and nobody wanted to listen.
Remember when ransomware was limited by your CPU? I mean, we all knew ransomware was a thing, but it's like it was a 386 and you could not encrypt the drive fast enough, right? And you could open the floppy drive to stop it. But that's no longer the case. And now people are forced to care, right? And so I like what he was, also what Matt said about, as a foundation, the code signing. Right? You have to start somewhere. And so I guess that's going to move us to our first buzzword bingo, SBOM.
Dun, dun, dun.
I'll take that one.
Okay.
So there are people who are hardcore against SBOM. They think it's a roadmap for the attackers. I'm sorry, the attackers don't need our SBOMs for that. I'm taking a much more pragmatic view of it. There's two scenarios where I think SBOM helps. The first one is the incident response team doesn't know what they don't know. They don't know what open source and what third-party components are in their enterprise, so they can't defend it. So something, happens and a supplier gets breached and everyone's running around going, do we use that?
Yeah, so SBOM is like step one of a 50-step program, is what you're saying?
It's forcing inventory.
Right.
In organizations that are like, oh, it's complicated. And it's the same thing. You're seeing vendors have the same reaction to, we don't know what's in our systems that hospitals have been having for years.
Grifter, was it you was mentioned that if you go down and look at the vendors, they're all busy telling you what you own on your network.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is we talked about it briefly, but just it's difficult to secure things if you don't even know you have them, right? So doing asset management is the first part of all of this, right? And we've been trying to do that for 30 years as well. But it sounds like it should be simple, right? Yeah. Oh yeah, yay you person out there for agreeing with me. I like you person who agrees with me. So like we've been trying to do this thing, and it does sound like it's something easy, but when you're acquiring company after company after company, and then you're like, I don't even know what they had, but quickly get them.
I want to see you do asset inventory on your third-party provider.
I'd like to see an asset inventory for your house, Jeff.
Yes.
But I think asset inventory, SBOM is the asset inventory of your code base.
Sure.
Do we use FreeType? I don't know. Do you use Chromium? I don't know. Do you use Electron? Yeah, well then you use FreeType and Chromium and like 20 other things.
I feel like this side is dominating the conversation.
Sorry.
Let's go to this side of the room.
We're very
I have tons of things to say. So back to the first comment.
Who's
the first one, who's responsible? Yeah. And so we kind of look at some of these big players and say, well, maybe they're responsible, right? They own the platform, they should put in security. But then I'd push back and say, there's a lot of security features that they're putting out there right now that nobody uses, nobody turns on, nobody applies patches in a timely manner. So we're looking at these big guys and just saying, well, protect me, please. They're actually putting a lot of knobs at your disposal right now that aren't even being used.
Right. Like so who uses the TXT on your CPU, right? Yeah. Very few. Like it's a feature there, but nobody uses it.
Yeah, so there's tons of irresponsibility to go around right now. And then I was the one making the comment backstage that I felt like when I walked the vendor floor, half of the vendors out there were trying to sell me a solution that helped me do inventory of what's on my network. And I thought that was so fascinating that still, like in 2021, one of the biggest struggles is just trying to figure out what do I even have on my network.
And your network is probably getting smaller because you're outsourcing more of it.
Right. And I might push back on the who's responsible. It's a great question. How can you argue against who's responsible? But I'm a sucker for the Olympics. I've been watching a lot of the Olympics, so I've got sports analogies on the mind. And it's not who's responsible, well, in addition to who's responsible. It's who's in the position to make the play, right? And we can argue about who's responsible, but who's in the position to actually make the change that we need at scale? Because we can't just do a billion changes of all of us making the right configuration error, all of us doing, buying the new vendor widget that's going to be perfect, and we have to buy a billion of them, we need to maintain a billion, and we need to train a billion of them, we need to integrate a billion of them. But if we've got some that can be in the position and make one small change and help a billion, and to a substantial degree, that's the platforms. And so we can like that, we can hate that, we can work around it. What I liked about Matt's keynote was he wasn't just, well, we have to trust them and put pressure on them to do the right thing. He was also saying on mobile devices, we need them to let go of the control, right? That we don't need them to do things better, we need them to let go. So now we can take all of the forensics and all the other telemetry that we do in Windows environments, and now we can do that on our Apple phones and the other mobile devices.
So that's the...
You're not going to agree to me this side? Oh, I was hoping I was going to get...
Where's that person who yelled before?
Great point.
Yay, that's Team Grifter over there.
Don't say that when I'm drinking, man. Yeah.
Did you bring your mom?
So I'm going to throw... I'll throw...
Maybe.
I'm going to throw Jay a softball. Okay.
Because I'm on the sports analogies, right?
That's right. So Jay is fond of saying, what do we need to do to make defense greater than offense? D greater than O. Because it really feels like offense is just eating defense's lunch, and it's just either it's automation or it's the scale or it's something. And so for years, Jay's been thinking about what needs to happen to give defense a chance. And give us the D greater than O update, 2021 edition.
Yeah, because it was DEF CON, it was 2013, right?
2013 I wrote that.
When you wrote that and said, boy, it feels like the attackers are running away from it, right? We had Stuxnet maybe 2 years earlier. We're just coming out of the revelations, what NSA had been doing that we learned from Snowden. And DT wrote, it feels like offense is running away from the field. And here we are 8 years farther along. And it still feels that way, right? I think, and so when we say, every time we're thinking about a solution, every time we're thinking about a metric, I'm trying to say, is this going to preferentially aid the defense at scale, or is this going to aid the attackers at scale? And I think we still don't have good metrics for that. I'd be really curious. I think on the offensive security side, right, we can say, all right, is what we're doing as researchers and as a community and pushing offensive security and research, is that helping the defenders? Like if we're releasing a new tool and say, oh, by releasing this new tool, we'll now know about this, and now everybody's going to be able to patch this, and we're going to do better. Does that actually work when we do that to improve the security? Right, we're coming up on DEF CON 30, and I still don't know if we know the answer if what we're doing is making things more secure. Yeah, I wasn't expecting a whole lot of applause on that one. Okay.
Way to bring the room down, Jay.
Yep.
No.
Yep.
Yeah, but you highlight one of the things, I always see as a trend, and this year was no different, was this emphasis that how do we optimize the human? I think one of the biggest challenges in defense is you have humans overrun by telemetry. They have so much information at their disposal, and the signal to noise ratio is just literally too high. And so there's always this struggle of how do I optimize the human? And so this year was no different. We had talks about how you basically, all the buzzwords you can think of, right? ML, AI, how do we use this to optimize the human? And visualization techniques, I saw some new ones. I saw one that was in the arsenal that was about how to write pen testing reports automatically for you. So we can free up the person from having to actually write a pen testing report, like put them on something more important. And so that optimizing the human is always such a really fascinating thing, because at the end of the day, I think security is still rooted in humans.
Who was that that ran defense at NSA for years? I'm totally blanking on his name now.
Rob Joyce?
Gosh, blanking on his name. Tony Sager.
Oh, yeah.
And Tony had this saying the first time I'd heard it, but it was essentially like, you can't win man-to-man. There's too many. So you have to automate. And so you spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out what you can automate as much as you can to free up the human. And then you have to figure out how to automate everything else. Like, you cannot have a hope in this world without automation. Mm-hmm. And I think that goes to what you're saying. Either you're going to burn out your human team, you're going to stress them, whatever it is. Like, automation is a huge part of it. And I don't think people take that seriously enough.
Well, yeah, I think it's also, part of the problem is the age-old problem of offense versus defense is that offense is sexy and defense is not. Like, right? It's like, oh, somebody comes out with a new exploit, discovers a new vulnerability, and it's like, oh, what a rock star, they're amazing. You defend your network successfily, good job.
And I'm curious.
Then you must be offense, because you are pretty sexy. So.
Hey. See. He's trying to win over the grifter side of the crowd.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, one person clapped when I said you were sexy. One.
But yeah,
I'm curious if it's a metrics thing. So when I think about it, it's like, when you win with offense.
Sure.
You get shelled. There's a feedback cycle. But on defense, it's like, well, was I just attacked? Did I defend myself? Like, I have no feedback loop to optimize my defense, where the attackers do. And so I think it's just naturally more prone to automation.
But I think you get that to a degree where it's like you have, maybe, who knows if it's just all smoke and mirrors, but you have successfully defended against these things today. But I don't think it has that same impact that a pen tester gets when they, pop a shell. Like, when you see those things as a defender, you just get sad. You're like, what if I miss something? What if that missed something, right? But I think to your point, like, automation it's not there, right? We haven't arrived with automation. It helps us do things. It helps us carve up very large data sets and hopefully hone in on things where we can spend time doing threat hunting in areas that matter, rather than having your hunters and your analysts pulling together data sources from all of the different devices, logs from here, packets from here, endpoint telemetry from here. Like, automation can help us do that, so we can take those limited folks, that limited skill set, and point them at the things that matter, but it's sure not going to defend things for us, at least not today.
Well, and you said that offense is sexy and defense is not, and that there's all these hot new bugs. You don't need a hot new bug to own people. Like, we still have cross-site scripting and like all input sanitization problems that we know how to prevent.
Sure.
And it's really easy to phish people. I mean, I almost got phished last night. Like, it was like so close, and then I'm like, wait a minute, that doesn't look right. But it was really good, well-crafted phish. And if I can almost fall for it, normals
Sure.
are going to fall for that. They're going to be like, oh no, there's something wrong with my account. Let me click this.
Right, my mom would have clicked on that. Apparently she's somewhere in the audience.
Yeah, because she keeps clapping for you.
I don't think is she part of Team Grifter?
Oh, yeah. she might be on Jay's team now.
By now, I mean, who isn't?
But yeah,
The
no,
other
you're
problem
absolutely
is,
right.
Until we get this automation, stop understaffing our security teams. We're burning our people out, and just
Amen.
You've got to put more bodies on it until you have the tool.
Team Kymberlee in the house.
Can I pick up on something you said
No.
earlier, Kymberlee? When you said surprise on the supply chain, like, of course, you're absolutely right. Like, we'd been talking about that we've been hit, but there's so much kindling out. Like, there's so much dry grass that spark can come from anywhere. We've just been building complexity on top of complexity. Bill Wood said, like, we started an insecure internet and we put a Band-Aid, and then we added more things to the stack and we kept adding Band-Aids. And now it's like Band-Aids all the way down. And any one of those can lead to that surprise of saying, oh my God, we're gonna lose a whole year of progress, a whole year of kids' birthdays, a whole year of, God damn it, hit on another Friday night, because it can be any one of those that's gonna get hit.
Yeah.
So I want to know, when do we get to stop blaming the users?
We should have already.
Yeah, I was gonna say we should have already stopped. Yeah, I agree.
We aren't speaking human language. If people are making the wrong trust decision, that's not because they're dumb. Heart surgeons don't know how to change the oil in their car, not because they're stupid, but because they're not mechanics. And we have to make better communications for users. We can't keep blaming them. We have to do better design, better accessibility, better user experience.
Bravo.
So there was this, I never got to play with it, but I was super fascinating that the human engineering or human feedback cycles, I guess on some automobiles where they knew sort of the limits of the car's speed, you're driving your car, you're up at 120, 130, whatever, and you're starting to kind of reach the limit, and the steering wheel starts feeling a little loose. And you're like, oh, I'm kind of at the limit of my vehicle, right? I know I'm near a boundary. And so I was always curious if you could put like a little vibrator thing in a mouse and you tie that to like a safe site list. And you're about to click on something and it's like, and you're like, whoa, my mouse doesn't normally do that, right? I shouldn't. There's no feedback loop again, right? You do something unsafe and you get owned, and you notice that 3 weeks later, you can't tie it back to an unsafe behavior from 3 weeks ago. So there's no feedback loop, and I was just hoping that somebody would be selling the
mouse vibrator.
If you try to tie a vibrating mouse to the sites my users are going to, you're just going to give them a feature.
I'm just saying we could probably think of the problem in different ways.
It's a good haptic feedback to reinforce security. Let's call it that.
Electrical shock.
I'm not talking some teledildonic,
Wrong conference.
Right, wrong
conference.
But yeah, they hook them up to a TENS machine, and whenever something happens, they're just the whole right side of their body seizes up. Don't you click
it's
it.
It's like Grifter's so pumped. Yeah, he's been clicking a lot of spam lately.
Boy,
But I think
audience
this
questions.
is fundamentally one of the challenges we have with SDL, is developer... SDL, software development lifecycle. It used to be a thing. It was like 10 years ago. And the developer writes some code, and they release a product, and then a researcher finds a vulnerability, and hopefully they report it to the security response team before they come speak about it at Black Hat. And the security response team has to triage it and then go get it fixed. But whoever has to fix it isn't usually the developer that wrote it. Oh. So your feedback loop is broken.
Again, broken. I see a trend developing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the, I always try to correlate security to safety, right? And it should be, in my mind, should be synonymous. Like, we don't have to train users how to not electrocute themselves with their laptop, and we have railings everywhere so you don't fall over. I don't have to walk through the world thinking about I'm trained on safety. The environment has been made in such a way that I can't screw it up. And I feel like security is failing in that. We should be making it so that users can't screw up from a security perspective.
But my freedom to own myself.
My rights.
Jeff, can I ask you a question? So when you wrote that the offense was getting better, I was thinking about this when we were talking about SDL. What areas do you think, since you wrote that, in the 8 years since you wrote that the defenders have done the best at? That you look back and say, man, since we did that, boy, we've really been putting away these classes of problems that just aren't as big an issue.
I'll answer the question with a question, which is...
Crap.
Yeah, crap. It's like, I can't think of, as a defender or offender, I can't think of any class of vulnerabilities, I think maybe one, that we've closed, right?
Yeah.
Off by one, memory corruption. I don't think, like, what have we actually solved? I think we move very quickly and we leave problems in our wake, but we don't actually close them down.
Can I push back a second? Because
Sure.
I know others are going to want to jump in. Sorry for speaking over you. I think if we open up, we don't just think about the technical debt. If we think about, for example, the process innovations, right? I mean, boy, we've got MITRE attack framework. I mean, it's an invention. It was free, right? And just think of it. I mean, that's really helped us think differently about this.
Well, I mean, the people
I'm not
that have the
saying that's
biggest,
changed
I'd say
everything.
the biggest gains, Apple with their ecosystem, their walled garden, but Apple does, comparatively speaking, a better job than others. And you either agree with it or don't, but there's not a better phone you can buy from a security standpoint, unfortunately, but that's the current state of the art for consumers. And so I would say, okay, in the defense world, sure, you can still get your iPhone owned with a zero click, but it's an edge case now. It's not like, you know, and so I think the market can supply those solutions, but if you look at why is Apple supplying those solutions, it's not because they necessarily want to make a great secure phone, it's they want to protect the App Store revenue, right? So we're getting a positive benefit, but not for the reason we wish we were getting it for, right? It's not necessarily altruistic to make the world a better place.
Cool.
Team Grifter, Kymberlee?
No, I'm good.
Okay, so that brings me to another buzzword, bingo. Zero trust. I said it.
Do we drink? Yes?
I think we drink. We do drink.
So whenever I hear the word zero trust, I just think least privilege. What am I missing? You
A
know,
big
I'm thinking
marketing
network
campaign?
segmentation. I'm thinking, you know, like what is it just a new coat of paint on the old problem?
Yes. Yeah. That's it. I mean, that's the extent of the conversation around that. Yes, like we're talking about incredibly foundational things we've talked about for a very long time being done under the umbrella of zero trust, right? This is what we should have been doing since 19-diggity, and we're still not doing right now. We love.
Remember mandatory
industry.
access control?
Well,
That was awesome in like the 80s, and we still don't have it. Yeah.
And that's the thing, but we'll put another coat of paint on this 10 years from now, and we'll call it something else, and all the banners in the expo floor will have another couple of buzzwords on it. And we'll
Negative
talk about
trust.
How, yeah.
-1.
Negative trust. What's it going to be? But yeah, I mean, that's we're having a lot of conversations like that. That's probably the most buzzwordy buzzword I think that I hear right now is zero trust. And it really feels like
we were trying to come up with a drinking game earlier around zero trust, but we would all be wrecked at the time we left the vendor floor. I mean, I like that. It was like remember the 4 eyes principle? You need to have 2 different people involved in a network change, so no one rogue administrator can Snowden you, you know, things like that. And it seems like they're all trying to get to the same, place, but something invisible is inhibiting us. Because it's not like these problems are unknown. We understand them. But something is it the invisible hand of the free market?
I can accept, I'll be a little bit friendlier to zero trust, because if we can get the C-suite and the other senior leaders and say, tell me about, I keep hearing about this thing, zero trust. It's a snazzier phrase than the end of the perimeter or other ways that we can talk about this. And if it can help if individual leaders can grab onto that within their organization and say, that's right, we've been saying this for 20 years, but now I get to say it in this way, zero trust. And if they can help us push through that,
Good point.
I can take that.
Yes.
Marketing for the win. Marketing for the win.
Team J for the win.
I bathe in your approval.
It's effective executive communication. My concern is when you're walking through the vendor hall and it's snake oil.
Yeah.
And it's not actually, it's selling you something you maybe don't need, or it's, it's got a little zero trust in here, but it's really something else. And
So,
One in the back.
let's do the right thing for the right reasons.
There we go. Team Kim.
So the follow-up question then, I guess, is we touched on it earlier, third parties, right? We're so reliant, we're so dependent on third parties. We talked about a little bit around supply chain, where go install XM and you're going to have 148 dependencies want to get installed, right? Good luck. So I view that as like a microcosm of the third-party problem. Well, for efficiency and cost savings, we're going to continue to outsource to third parties. And I sort of see it as your corporate identity is sort of three things. It's your email, it's your DNS, and it's your website. And once you start losing control of those, you've essentially lost control of your website, right? Because if you lose your email, people can do password resets, they can get your domain. If they get your domain, they can. And so as we outsource everything, at some point we've outsourced the identity of our business. And do you see a logical, for everybody, do you see a point where like, okay, we've outsourced enough, there's enough third party out there, or is this just, at some point you fully outsource the entire enterprise and all of your employees are essentially at like AWS consoles managing your infrastructure? Is there a logical stopping point where companies say there's enough risk, I'm keeping my name server? Or do we not think like that? And it's just going to be maximum cost saving means maximum outsourcing, and that's just what will happen. Because it seems to be just organically happening, but I've never read a paper that says, here's how to tell if you've outsourced enough.
Right.
It just seems to keep going.
Yeah, at least from my perspective, what I saw early on was just this fear of outsourcing originally, actually, and then there was kind of this putting the toe in the water, right? You outsourced a little bit and you're like, wow, this is actually great.
This is awesome.
Right, this is actually great. I just moved all my risk to somebody else.
Not my
and
problem.
so you get a little bit deeper in, and I think we're still like maybe the body's halfway in where that comfort level is. And I've actually seen this last like year and a half with the pandemic actually, I think
it's accelerated it, right?
Accelerate the jumping in the pool. And so I think over the next couple of years, you'll start to see maybe some of that backpedal where you start to realize like maybe I outsourced a little bit too much of my risk.
But what would trigger, why would they even think that?
Yeah, it's hard to say. From my perspective, at least, I think it'll be that you've outsourced that critical piece of your identity of the company, right? At some point, there's a lot of like peripheral things you do right for your company, stuff that doesn't really need to be tied to the culture and your values. But then there are core pieces that if they're not actually tied to that kind of central soul of your company, you start to have trouble with it. And if you've outsourced the piece of that central soul, I think that's when you're going to start to have trouble with it and reel it back. But.
We did a project a couple of years ago. It was for an insurance company. And they were saying, boy, it seems like the internet risks and you talked about and that they're getting passed around. And someone early on called it cyber subprime. It wasn't long after, and I'm like, oh my God, please, and I say cyber a lot, and that was too much for me.
Drink.
And then I thought, it was actually one of the analogies that helped me think more deeply. Because prior to 2008, I'd been in the finance industry, my wife had been in the finance industry, and the people that knew most about the risk said these risks aren't correlated. That the American real estate market, it's not like you can have a problem in one area, it doesn't affect somewhere else. And the more expert you were in that field of financial risk, the more you would have said it was crazy that these risks from the American real estate would take down governments in the UK and would almost break apart the euro. The more expert you were, the more you'd say that was impossible, but it ends up the risks were really correlated because you had these hidden pools. I was like, oh my God, that kind of sounds like our field, right? Where we've got these risks and they're aggregating upstream and we have no idea where they are or how they can cascade.
See, I just think, there'll be a GDPR fine against Amazon so great, they'll declare bankruptcy.
Right. Yeah, and
Where's that in your risk calculus?
So what do we do when one of these IT companies that's too big to fail has a Lehman moment, right? They're there with all of our data on Friday and they're gone on Monday, right? It happened to banks that were 130 years old, right? How do we think, and again, whether or not that's a ridiculous example, or what are we going to do when we have these correlated risks that are well upstream?
Well, Jeff, you asked, what would be the trigger to make the pendulum swing back from, hey, maybe we've outsourced too much? And unfortunately, that trigger is going to be an incident. It's going to be a breach. It's going to be, we had a supplier that we outsourced to, and they got compromised, and the adversary moved laterally and stole our crown jewels. And that's what the wake-up call is going to look like.
It's sort of like, careful, the oven's hot, and you don't believe it until you touch it. Like, we're just going to keep outsourcing until we start burning our fingers, and it'll be like, okay, that's where we burn our fingers, so we're not going there anymore.
And it'll be the, wow, we burned our fingers really badly. How do we solve this? Oh, wow, solving that's really hard. Let's just bring it in-house again. And so we get permissive, and then we contract and get controlling. It's kind of like parenting. You let your kids do something, they break the rules, you get controlling, you take it back in-house.
And so you think we're still in that expansion phase? We haven't had that?
I hope not, but probably.
Do you think SolarWinds and Kaseya, I mean, do you think the last year has affected that, where they're starting to be cautious?
Yes. Things that things I proposed 5 years ago are suddenly getting funded now. So yay, I think. But yes, it's similar to when Sony got hacked. All the gaming companies suddenly realized, oh, we actually have something of value that we need to care about security. Yeah. It's not just gamer tags and your reputation score. Oh yeah, there's credit cards in here. Oh, there's in-game currency in here. Oh, they could take down our network, which is basically printing money for us. And so all of a sudden you see somebody get hit, whether it's, the entire East Coast not getting gasoline and thinking, could that happen to me?
Yeah, so I think that's...
I heard the entire East Coast not getting Vaseline. I was like, boy, I missed that news.
Wrong conference, Jay. Wrong conference.
Frank.
No, I think.
So I think that goes back to the core question is, will ransomware make people care? Because nothing else has made them care. Is ransomware going to do it, right? And then there was one observation somebody made which said that originally it was anything that can run a Bitcoin miner is going to run a Bitcoin miner, right? People will break in and they'll run it on your toaster and they'll monetize your toaster. But not so much, that didn't really come about. But they might ransom the toaster controller company. And so is sort of ransomware the new Bitcoin mining scam, and will that make people care?
I think yes, and just like we've...
But why?
Because we've seen that shift already in malware and the way that it targeted people just like that, where before it was like, okay, if I get onto this machine, then I'm going to use it to mine cryptocurrency, but then cryptocurrency dives here and dives there, and then it's like, oh, well, now that's not profitable.
Now there's 90,000 different coins, and so which one do you mine?
Exactly, which one am I mining? And so it's like, oh, instead, I'm just going to lock everything down, and I'm going to get my currency, I'm just going to get it a different way. And we talked about this briefly, hiding behind the curtain back there before, but the thing that was interesting is we were talking about healthcare, and that was like, healthcare has been targeted by ransomware. Boom. Healthcare has been targeted by ransomware for years, and like this is people's lives. People are on life support and things, and they pay it. They pay it immediately because it's like, oh, this is scary. Quick, pay. And so you hear about it, and then it goes away, and then you hear about it, and it goes away. But no one seemed to care. When all of a sudden everyone cared to the point of the White House putting out a memo and saying this is what you need to do, is as soon as gas prices went up. And that's fucked up.
Right.
And can I be cynical? I don't know if either, I don't want to step on either if you're going to jump in. I don't know if this is cynical or realistic. Another reason that we're caring about ransomware is because it's tied to nation state. And that's led to more wake-up calls in Washington, D.C. than if it were purely criminal. If Colonial Pipeline didn't have Russia on the other end, if that was a Brazilian group would the White House be caring as much about it right now? And I'm not saying that's bad that they are. So I worked in the White House about 15 years ago, and when I was there, this kind of policy fell under more economic policy, right? I mean, we were saying technology was policy was a subset of economic policy and innovation. Now, technology policy is a subset of national security policy because it's about competition with Russia and especially competition with China. And I think that's one of the reasons that ransomware, not just because of the impact on all of us and on each of us, but also because it's a nation on the other side.
Yeah, and one of the things, as you were talking about, we were talking in the behind our sneaky curtain about healthcare, and it was just very fascinating that over the last couple of years we saw this immense rise in healthcare cybersecurity attacks. If you looked at like all of the different various breach reports that come out every year that kind of surmise all of the annual statistics, you would have seen healthcare in the top 3 of basically every single one of them. But I felt like the amount of attention that it got, it didn't align with the impact. And I concentrated on the healthcare medical device space for about the last 7 years. And so being in the thick of it and to see that there really wasn't the spotlight and why. And to Grifter's point, as soon as an oil pipeline gets shut down, everyone comes out of the woodwork and is just all about this. And you're like, we have had patients' lives at risk for years with this immense rise in ransomware and attacks on hospital systems. And like, why did nobody care? And to Kim's point, we needed more incidents, which is a really sad thing to say. Like, we needed more instances of patients getting hurt, I think, for people to care. And fortunately, we didn't really have a lot of those incidents, but it's sad that we needed those.
Yeah.
The healthcare industry needs patients to get hurt before people care.
But here's the thing about that, and they're never gonna let me do this again, by the way, okay? 'Cause, like, I'm just gonna get super real here.
You and I are going to have a podcast.
Keep it real.
All right, we're gonna get super real here, which is we're asking, like, will users take the right steps? Will companies take the right steps? When will people do the right things when it comes to security? And the reality is, if this pandemic has taught me anything, it's that even when the threat can kill you, we still won't apply the patch.
Right.
At least 40% of people won't apply the patch.
That was that observation that every zombie movie has it wrong, right? If there is a zombie apocalypse, 40% of the people will run toward the zombies.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing is, the only, to not just leave it like super dark, but like the only, the hope that I have is that there are still people who are going to continue creating the patches. So as new threats come, as things come at us, there will always be someone willing to create the patch. And then it's up to us whether or not we apply it.
Since we're trying to be slightly optimistic in our last couple of minutes.
Let's not make everybody be like, oh, let's go drink, this is terrible.
I'm seeing more and more appreciation and focus on culture and communication and security. Yes, technology is king, code rules, show me your O days, but if you can't get your user base to not click to see the dancing hamsters, you're gonna be having your pipeline owned again. Because most of these ransomware attacks aren't something that Microsoft or Google or Facebook can save you from because it's the person in your mailroom who clicked a link in their mail. So the more we talk about culture, the more we talk about reinforcing behaviors, smart design, I think the better we'll be.
Yeah, and so one of the things I always like to bring up, I am a hardware security geek, and I love anything in security that we can push down into the hardware layer. And so you kind of brought up, we have these just very horizontal, ubiquitous security issues across everything that we don't seem to be fixing. And so one of my fascinations is how do we bring that protection to the hardware layer and just squash entire families of things? So you are starting to see things like that emerge at that fundamental just hardware layer. Like how do we squash all ROP attacks, right? How do we squash all COPS? How do we squash all of these just at the hardware layer? No longer relying on the individual application to do security right. And so I think there's this real rise in the industry of this appreciation that if you take security lower, you can actually squash entire things. And not that software developers shouldn't do security well, but we all know at the end of the day, there's still a lot of issues in writing software. So if we can just make it safe for them to write shitty software, because we'll protect them at that hardware layer. And so anyway, I'm a huge fan of how do we take entire families of vulnerabilities and squash them at the hardware layer, so we don't have to rely on the software to do it correctly.
And I love that, because you can think about that all the way up.
First applause.
Right, because you can take that all the way up, like all the way up OSI, and saying, like, instead of blaming the user first, right, another 7 layers had to fail for that human to make the mistake. I love that idea.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, and because the attackers don't really need the super exclusive exploit when I can just get you to click a mail.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're coming to the end of our session, and I feel like I've cheated you because I haven't gone to the audience yet for a question. So I must at least get an audience question to feel like I've completed my duty. So if there's any questions in the audience for our illustrious panel.
Well, they turn the lights on you. The pressure's on.
Oh, geez, they're putting their hands up to
really
cover their eyes, not to ask questions.
Everybody hide.
A collective hiss from the crowd.
That's right.
It's okay, it burns our eyes too. So.
Okay, well, if we don't have any questions. Oh, yes, go ahead, sir.
Password spray and whatever, the actual built-in stuff has gotten much better, and that's something to be, optimistic about. Windows is so much more secure than it was 10 years ago.
So
is there a question, or?
No, that's all right.
So his observation is we repeat it to them.
I do.
So they didn't hear that. Will you summarize that for the crowd, since they?
Yeah, so the question was that in the last 8 years, the platforms, iOS and Android and Windows, that the type of attacks, character of attacks have gotten much more either social engineering or maybe phishing, and the attacks have actually gotten harder and harder, and that's a cause for hope. And I would agree, but I think we also heard in the talk this morning that the number of 0 days being deployed by adversaries is going up.
Well, is that a, so here's a question. Is that a cause for concern? Does that mean we're getting better at finding them? Because I feel like that's something we have definitely
Either
gotten
we're getting
better
better
at.
finding them,
our visibility into our security issues has absolutely improved.
Yeah.
And so is this more a question of that there are more of these problems out there, or are we just finding them more readily? Like, because I mean, I want to take the optimistic approach that yes, in fact, we're getting better.
Well, remember the
at finding
sales pitch of cloud in the original early days was that they have the experts, they can protect you better than a small to medium business. So it absolutely made sense to trade your current set of problems for some cloud problems, but in the end, it was a net gain, right? Microsoft can protect your email better than you can protect your own email. So that was considered a good trade. And I think we're at that point now where we're getting those cloud benefits long enough that we're probably seeing some.
And I think that's what, I mean, it was communicated a little bit where is the dial back? I think the two things that people came to was like control, like when you decided like control or pain, right? Those were the things I think, that's what I took away from that. Like, when do we start thinking I outsource too much? When you realize you have lost control or something hurts.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess that's where we'll start ratcheting back.
All right, well, thanks for sitting in for our Locknote session. It's always enjoyable. We'll see you around tomorrow. If you have any questions, we'll be around for a little bit. Thank you.